Welcome to Forestry Now, where we explore the forces impacting profitable and sustainable management of commercial forests and natural woodlands. I'm Dermot McNally. In this interview, I speak with Olive Leavy, a forest owner from County Westmeath, who currently works with Pro Silva. Olive has chosen to manage her forest using the continuous cover forestry method, and in this interview we explore all aspects of this, including windblow, ash dieback, harvesting, a firewood business, and much more. But to get started, I asked Olive to introduce herself and explain how she ended up managing the family forest in Westmeath.
I kind of got involved maybe about 9 years ago. I was living in the UK and working there, and then I moved home and my parents had planted part of the farms. My parents had a dairy farm and we had an out farm about 3 kilometres up the road, and in 2001 they planted about 20 hectares of forestry up there. And it was something that mum and dad were involved in it. I had nothing to do with it. I'd never stepped into it after it was planted. They spent a lot of time there, doing a lot of maintenance, doing a lot of pruning on the broadleaves and stuff. And it wasn't until I came back from England in 2016 when I came back, and it's about 2017 when I went up to the forest, and that's where my involvement in forestry started.
Am I right in saying you started helping them out a wee bit with managing the forest?
Yeah, so my mum had passed away. When I came home, Dad was like, would you give me a hand with the paperwork? Because he knew he needed to kind of do a felling license and, kind of start thinking about how to manage it and stuff. And I was like, sure. I moved home without much of a plan, which is kind of a lot of what I do. And so I was around and I said, sure, no problem, I'd help. And he brought me up, and the first time I stepped in it, I just really just kind of blew my mind that how these fields that I had played in and, counted cattle in as a child completely transformed into something I could never have imagined. There was a completely different ecosystem. Like there'd be no thinnings, there was no paths through. So we were climbing over branches and trying to find our way through it. I got completely lost and did for several months. Dad was involved in the local forest owner group, and I started to go with him to meetings and stuff, and just meeting other people who had forestry and who were passionate about forestry kind of really drew me into it, I think. So we started with the paperwork, and then I was like, sure, I can do a bit of the thinning, so I was around. It was a nice summer and I said, sure, I'll give it a go. So I got trained up on the chainsaw. I did a week-long chainsaw training course. From that, then I ended up spending a lot of time in the forest, and I put in inspection paths, and that's kind of how it all started, yeah.
Well, tell us then exactly what was planted then on the first day, so we get us up to date.
Of course, yeah. So it's a 19-hectare site. There's about 14 hectares of Norway spruce. We're in the Midlands, and it's a lot of it is very low-lying. So they put Norway spruce in instead of Sitka because it's more frost resistance. It doesn't flush in spring until a bit later. So it's kind of not as sensitive to that late frost that we can get around here. And then there was a bit under 3 hectares of sycamore and 2 hectares of ash, roughly. I don't know why there was more sycamore than ash went in, because usually forests like that, it would have been pretty much all ash or, more ash than sycamore anyway. But for some reason, we had more sycamore, and actually very lucky for us, given what's happened to the ash, that we still have, a good block of broadleaves there in the sycamore. And then there was also kind of a couple of pockets of beech planted and birch. But on the site, there's a couple of really interesting features in it. There's a row of veteran beech trees, maybe 150, 200-year-old beech trees running right through the middle of it. And then there's also it was a windbreak that my grandfather planted back in 1954 of Sitka spruce. So they're still there. So we've got these old Sitka spruce. So there are these little kind of features that break up the forest, and all the hedgerows were retained as well. So it kind of helps break it up and kind of And those hedgerows are kind of quite an interesting seed source. And the beech trees, they're throwing out huge amount of seed.
Sometimes in forestry, when we have conifer blocks, you'll see the hedges smothered in. Did the hedges manage to have enough space to stay alive and stay productive?
In parts, they wouldn't have been amazingly thick hedges, before anyway. Some kind of would be better than others, but you can still see that they're there, and anywhere they're open, they're kind of thriving. But definitely, I suppose, within the blocks in Norway, they wouldn't really see those. Was mature trees in them as well, so the mature trees are still going. But we've got holly in them that's coming out as well, and so yeah, okay. I wouldn't say like they're fantastic, hedges. I know there are people who've got who are very much into hedge laying and stuff, and they have beautiful hedges that they keep the conifers back from to protect the hedge, but these wouldn't have been, well-maintained hedges. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, understood. And just to finish off then, it's low-lying ground, typically can get a bit of frost. And what about the soils then? Olive, how are they, or is there a mixture?
Yeah, Midlands soils. It was marginal fields. So where the broadleaves are, that's the best ground, and that would be mineral. There's kind of a slope in it, and kind of the broadleaves are kind of up on the higher bit. That would be more minerally, and then it gets down to into peaty ground really, and that's where a lot of the conifers are on it. It was marginal soil.
When you walked in 2016, 2017, everything had established fairly well, and you had started going to meetings to get a bit of information. At what point did you make the decision to try CCF as a management technique?
That didn't come till a bit later, actually. I suppose I hadn't really thought about what we were doing kind of long term. Though, I hadn't really a vision for the place developed. It was more like, well, we need to get a road in. We need to start thinning. I started thinning the broadleaves myself, and we were just kind of working through things step by step, really, and kind of not thinking about a bigger picture. The CCF came along really when I started seeing the signs of ash dieback, which was about 2018, I think, was the first signs. Then 2019, kind of started to see it more. And then it was around that time that I was a bit like, whoa, this is a bit of a risky asset. So I was thinking of purely from economic points of views, going, right, if I've got this asset, it's really I've got three components to it. One of them has got a disease that's going to wipe it out. So the Norway sycamore ash. So ash is gone. I started to hear about the bark beetle in Europe that prefers Norway, but the spruce bark beetle. I was like, if that gets in, then, I'm really, it's a really risky asset. So I was like, what can I do to diversify this asset to make this more resilient is the word I've now learned. I didn't realize at the time that's what I was thinking, but that's, and that's what kind of led me to continuous cover forestry. And there was a few people in the group, two people in the group who were already kind of starting to transform their forests over to a CCF forest. And those little seeds, listening to their conversation, it's amazing how that can spread. And kind of now about half the group is managing their forests under CCF. So that kind of peer-to-peer knowledge and seeing others do it was really helpful. So that was kind of started me on the journey. And then I met my forester, Manus Crowley, and he's actually the chair of Pro Silva Ireland as well. And he came on board to help, he looked at the forest and was like, yeah, if you're up for it, then this is a good forest to try and transform over to CCF. So that's the journey we're on now, is the transformation. So it's a slow process. It'll be my lifetime, breaking it up, introducing new species, making it more resilient, trying to get that irregularity in tree height, in tree composition, in species. So just, bringing in more variability and irregularity into the forest.
Okay, so between Manus and yourself, you've got the road in and your first conifer thin. And generally with CCF, it's a fairly standard 1 and 7. You do a little bit of selection. Is that how it worked out, or did you just do anything different?
We didn't. So I suppose that is like generally your first thin is about just getting the infrastructure in place. So putting in your racks. So that's where the machines will always, travel, and you do some selection. In my site, it was a little different because we are concerned about stability because of the soils. So we decided to go, kind of our whole approach is little and often. So we put in the racks in some places because there was a lot of drains put in, because again, it was kind of wet. There was only 6 rows of trees between each drain. So we ended up going just 1 in 6 in those areas. So we were just literally going in the middle between the drains. And we then abandoned some of those racks. So we got a thinning in, and then we abandoned some of them. And then in other places, we did 1 in 7. I think there was a couple of places we might have even done 1 in 8. So I suppose that's kind of a big point that I kind of want to make about continuous cover forestry, is that it's not, prescriptive thing. So when you're managing a conifer monoculture for a clear fell, it's all really quite similar. So you do your first thinning and you'd expect a certain amount of timber out, and your second thinning, it's kind of because it's a uniform forest. So you can kind of predict your outcomes, and if you know what your yield class is, you can figure out kind of what you'd expect at each thinning. Whereas with CCF, it's constantly responding to what's there. So you apply measures that suit the site. So every thinning is different depending on the site, So we went light on the first thinning in that we didn't do much selection. And then we just had our second thinning. But it's really, I suppose, we've kind of 1.5 thinnings done now at this stage, because we didn't want to do a full second thinning on it, because we were afraid we'd take out too much timber in one go because of the whole stability issue. So we're going to go back in again in 4 years, which is quite quickly, so we're going to do little and often. So I wouldn't want anyone to think, that's the volume you get from a first thinning on a CCF. It all depends on the site, and it's because the whole thing is about that we want to keep this forest standing. Just do a bit, see how the forest responds, adapt to that, and do it again, because, you're not working to an end point. The first thinnings that we did, we took out about 13 hectares of Norway, and we took out about 575 tonne out of the conifers. So I suppose that is quite similar to a first thinning, and I suppose a little maybe light on first thinning if it was, we were managing it on a clear fell model. And then this thinning that we did was about the same tonne as well that we took out, but a much higher proportion of pallet. It was about 50% pulp, 50% pallet. So basically we're targeting bigger, badly formed trees to focus on the quality. And it happens that in my site, the quality is in actually the smaller trees, but that's okay. I've got quality and they'll come on a bit later.
I'll get back to my chat with Olive Leavy shortly, but if you're in the market for forestry lands, go to forestsales.ie, where you'll find forests for sale across the country and all the information you need to make a decision. That's forestsales.ie. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Olive Leavy. Okay, so as of autumn 24, I think you've done your second thin.
So we're only just finished, and it's not, I wouldn't even call it a full second thinning, and we're kind of 1.5. So we're going slowly with it. But it's Norway, not growing. There's, some areas are growing really well, others are much slower. We don't have a big top height. It's really come on. It's amazing how it just kind of seems to just shoot up. Even in the space from the thinning to now, I've seen such growth rates, and just kind of the trees seem to be able to, the crowns look much healthier in places than they had been, So
yeah,
it's amazing how quickly it can respond.
Okay, and can we go back to the ash area then and tell me, when was the ash and the sycamore intimate? Were they mixed through each other? And when you took out the ash, what did you replace it with?
Yeah, the ash, the heartbreaking ash. We had a lovely stand of ash. Dad had spent a huge amount of time pruning them, and clean stems, really, really good. We kind of had smaller blocks that were around, a lot of it was around the edges of the forest, because that was kind of the best ground. And I got some hurley butts out. So we kind of started the hurleys maybe in 2022. So yeah, I was kind of seeing losing the crowns from about 2019, 2020, 21, each year progressively, you could see the disease progress in the stand. And got some hurley butts out. And now when he was there, we marked over 100 trees that were suitable, that had suitable butts. But once he started taking them out, there was honey fungus that had got in because the trees were sick. The honey fungus was getting in and was staining the timber. And although it doesn't damage the timber, they just can't sell it at a premium price. Like the hurley makers don't want it because it's stained. So he ended up only taking 30 butts out of it, which was really, a bit disappointing given that there was butts there, but it was just with the honey fungus. And then we cleared. So I had been thinning the ash, and I was using that timber. I had a small firewood business, which I can tell you a little bit about in a minute. But so I had been tipping away at it, and then I'd taken some out, and then it was in November 23 we cleared the whole site. Like that last 12 months, like there was no crowns left, and it was getting very, very dangerous in under them, would snap. And I was like, right, we need to just get this out. But there was the timber. There was still value in the timber. So I was like, let's just try and get this out as quickly as possible. Sold all of it for firewood, which was, good. Got a little bit back from that. And then we replanted with a native woodland mix. So my thinking behind that is...
Oh, lovely. Okay.
Yeah, because it's that front edge as well. It's kind of when you come into the forest, it's the first thing that you see. So to kind of get that nice mix of trees, and then you move into kind of, I suppose, the more commercial blocks in a way. So to just have that transition from open field into that native woodland mix and then into the more commercial blocks was kind of the idea. And then because it was kind of, smaller, narrower, it kind of, I think, will lend itself just from an aesthetic point of view. Now there is, of course, oak, so there will be some timber value in it, but it is mainly to have that kind of biodiversity corridor around the edge of the forest, and for that transition from, open farmland into kind of the forest. So that was kind of the idea behind that. And then also as a seed source, increasing the species diversity that we'll have in the future, a big bank of seed.
Lovely. So are deer an issue where you are, Olive?
I am so lucky. I mean, we have been lucky. So we had no grey squirrel when we planted first. So there's been no damage to the sycamore. Like grey squirrel have really done, like we're really seeing it now. Like they did a lot of damage back on particularly sycamore when it was planted in the early noughties. And but we had no grey squirrel. So the sycamore is fine. And then I have seen a stag a couple of times in there, and I've seen a little bit of damage, but really it is nothing like compared to Wicklow, Kilkenny, Kerry, the hot spots where there is nothing growing. I have regeneration, natural regeneration everywhere. So I'm very vigilant. I'm always watching. Now I haven't seen any tracks for at least a year. So I think it could have just been a lone stag that was kind of roaming. So I'm monitoring it carefully. That's the biggest barrier to CCF in Ireland, are deer.
Am I right in saying you're next door to another forest?
Yes. It's quite a big block of forestry. I'd say 150 hectares in total, maybe. There's kind of 3 owners. We're on the edge. We've got 20 hectares and then 50, 60 in the middle and then another bit on the end. So yeah, over 100. So, I mean, it would be a perfect place for a deer to settle. But at the minute, maybe we're on the edge. I don't know. I mean, yeah, we'll see. It's something that we're monitoring. But yeah, we're very lucky that we don't have deer, don't have any invasive species, don't have like rhododendron. I don't have rhododendron, don't have, laurel. We actually have red squirrel now in it. We have foxes, rabbits, pine martens, everything.
The next thing I wanted to ask you was, Olive, Am I right in saying that you used the opportunity of reforing the ash area to get some of the family involved?
Yes. So there was one corner quite near the entrance, a small little rectangle. And I thought this is the perfect place because it's near the entrance. It's not too big to get the niece. I don't have children, but I've got 7, well, 6 at the time. And the baby niece was almost about to be born. So we got them up. It had been mounded. And we got them up and we got them to plant. So about 120 trees in total. So all of them planted trees, and that's there. I'm calling it Nibbling's Nook. So nibbling is it's like sibling only for nieces and nephews. Oh. And they
very good.
Love it. Like, it's amazing to see. And it's like they get so excited when they see how much the trees have grown over them, because like it's only 18 months ago, not even, that they planted them, and they were only little twigs, and now there's something that's twice their height, and they get so excited when they see it. And hopefully that then will become a little education corner as well, because it's got easy access. There's a real nice mix of species in there. It's by far the best well looked after corner. It's very easy for me to manage it, so I'm always just making sure the trees are coming along, and so that'll be a real interesting little corner to try and get them involved and interested in trees and nature.
1 or 2 last questions on the ash then. Are you struggling with briars? And have you much volunteer sycamore coming up and ruining your nice native woodland?
Oh, the briars. The briars are an absolute nightmare. And it's not the briars per se, it's the cleaver, the sticky...
Oh, right.
Robin run the hedge, or there's loads of different sticky back. The trees can get through the briars, and actually the briars can protect them against deer, deer browsing and stuff. But it's the sticky back that is growing over the briars and then just pulling the trees down. So we've so many hours of maintenance gone in. I mean, I'm very hands-on anyway. So, I mean, the forester, like, there is part of the scheme has a maintenance grant, but it no way would cover the amount of hours that is needed to manage. And this is a big problem with the ash, is the re-establishment, with the vegetation that's there. So, I mean, I try and keep on top of it, but it is, we had to spray. I really didn't want to use chemicals, but there was just no other way for us to just get them down. In the first year, like 90% of them were hidden. So we had to spray. And then now a lot of them are getting up over them. But I think we'd have another, I'd say spring, we need another really hard go. We won't use chemicals though. I'll go in with strimmer and stuff. But now I can see where the trees are, But like, we've been in, like, the forester has had a guy in as well. So between us, like, we're really working hard at it to try and get them up. It's a big problem, especially for people who don't have time to go in and manage them. Like, that re-establishment after the ash is very, very challenging, because there is, the briars had really come because there was no canopy for 2 years. So the briars were there already. And once briars are in, it's very difficult to get them out. And
very difficult,
really difficult. But no, it's kind of a couple of areas that are quite poor that we're going to have to replant again. But overall, the majority of it now, I mean, it was worth that effort at the start. It's looking like almost over the height of the briars, so once the leader's over, you're okay. The sticky back was just pulling them down, so yeah, but a lot of scrapes there last.
Yeah, the spray is something no one wants to do, but the reality is it's often necessary if you want the trees to grow. And I suppose we can satisfy ourselves that it's a one-off intervention that won't happen again, if at all, especially in a CCF forest. So it's a sacrifice.
Yeah, that was the compromise we have to make. Like, there often are times you have to make a compromise and kind of, wade it up, and to get it established is far, in my opinion, more important than a one-off use, very carefully applied, targeted weed control to get them established. So, that's the decision. Yeah.
Olive, before we come up to the present moment, I want to ask you about any effects of storms in the January of this year, January 25. Any windblow, a significant windblow, or did that change your view on how things had to happen going forward?
Yeah. So we did have a little bit now. I'm very conscious that people have had full forests destroyed, and kind of it has been really decimating for a lot of people. But we did have some damage. So the ash was kind of on the westerly prevailing side, so it was acting as a windbreak. So when the ash came out, that raw edge of conifers was never exposed to wind. So even prior to that storm, that edge, every wind event, we'd lose a few trees because of its stability,
Yeah.
And then at the storm, we lost kind of a biggish pocket near the front. The whole edge has crept back. And then another block of conifer that was kind of at the end of a field. And it was really interesting, that bit. So it's kind of there's kind of a tillage field that the forest kind of goes around. And on the top bit of it, it's nearly all broadleaf. So there's beech and sycamore. And then there was a block, like a triangle in the middle of it of conifers, and then broadleaves again. Every single conifer went down and not one broadleaf. So just that entire block of conifer went down. And not one broadleaf came down, but it was pulled down. Like it was, you could see it was pulled down by a conifer. So I thought that was just really, really interesting. Just, I suppose the broadleaves didn't have crowns, they're different root architecture. I suppose it just reaffirmed in my head the idea of mixing species, that one can give stability to another. We got that cleaned up when we were doing the thinning. So we need to go in and underplant or replant that. And then we're actually going to underplant a few rows of that exposed edge with birch. Just put birch in because there should still be enough light. Now, we didn't do any thinning around it because it's so unstable. But we're just going to see if that might help just anchor that edge a little bit better. And then we're going to plant it to kind of try and kind of with some fast-growing species in front of it to kind of, act as a better windbreak and kind of make a kind of varied edge to help disperse the wind on it. So, yeah, this winter, that'll get replanted. And then we had quite a lot of snap throughout. So Norway has a tendency of snapping anyway. But I suppose the thing that out of that, it means I now have quite a lot of standing deadwood. So we made sure that when we were doing the thinning, that none of that got cleaned up. So we, and like some of it snapped quite high. So we have these nice standing deadwood now. And my big thing is I would love to get woodpeckers in. So there are woodpeckers in Mullaghmeen, which is maybe about 25 kilometers away. So I'm like, if I create the habitat, I might get woodpeckers in. So that's kind of the idea. But standing deadwood's really important for the biodiversity. A storm created it, so we're just leaving it there, rather than cleaning it up. So I suppose out of everything, I always try and find silver linings. So there's a little bit of a silver lining in that, that I might get my woodpeckers sooner.
Yeah, hopefully so. Also, Olive, can you explain what ring barking is and why you did it in the forest?
Yeah, so ring barking is a technique to create standing deadwood, really. So you remove, as it is, a ring of bark the whole way around a tree, and that stops the nutrient flow. So all the nutrients in a tree flow within the first couple of millimeters under the bark, and the rest then inside is actually timber fibers. So it's a way of killing the tree and creating standing deadwood. Now, because of soil sensitivities and stuff in our site, we're very careful in where, there were pockets, areas, little corners that we didn't want the machine just driving through. So there are areas that are inaccessible. So I'm using ring barking there to it's a way of thinning as well, because as that tree dies, that crown will be gone. So you're releasing the trees around it and you're creating standing deadwood. Yeah. So it's not something like, it's a very light prescription. Like I think I've done 10 trees maybe so far. I probably do maximum 20 in the entire, 13, 14 hectares. Like you don't go around crazy, And like there are trees that we would have marked to be removed in the thinning, but just the machine didn't get to them. So it's a way of creating space for the other trees around it and creating standing deadwood. And it's something I can do then as well. So rather than just like pushing the machine through an area that the soils really aren't stable enough, but we're still thinning the forest. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
Fantastic. And on your recent field day, I'm told that you've explained one or two measures for water protection, and you've kind of touched on them there, but maybe you could just mention specifically why it matters, the things you've done, and how that's keeping your water clear that comes out of the forest then.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's standard practice, and it has been really, implemented in the majority, 99% of forest operations now adhere to all, water protection, but it is really, really important. So, I mean, like we have setbacks. So like no machinery goes within the water courses, within the proximity. And even like, we would definitely ensure that the machines, don't go close, and those areas, actually, there's interesting habitat around. Like we have a couple of drains that, there's kind of a lot of willow growing around and stuff. So kind of like in the middle of the conifers. So we just don't let the machines go in and just leave those areas, As I was saying, there's one corner that's very, very soft that, really the trees haven't done particularly well. It was always a problem area, even as when it was in grassland. And so we're just going to leave that for nature, that corner. I'll use ring barking to kind of thin some of the timber out, but there's a lot of birch after coming through in that area. But protecting water is like essential. Like our water quality is really, really poor, and forestry is actually a great way of protecting water, slowing the flow of water down. Like in heavy rain, it helps just slow it hitting the ground, absorbing the water, slowing the whole cycle down, reducing soil erosion. And again, so we just need to make sure that our operations don't undo any of that good work. And that's what CCF is all about, protecting soil and water, because these are permanent forests, so you don't want to damage either of those. You have to work with nature the whole time. That's the whole philosophy is, you protect soil, protect water, protect biodiversity, protect habitat, while producing timber. So that's kind of the whole idea.
Let me pause the interview for a second to ask you this. Could your business benefit from increased profile in the forestry sector? Well, if so, maybe you should be advertising on Ireland's only dedicated forestry podcast, with new episodes coming out every 2 weeks. So get in touch with Forestry Now to see how we can make it work for you. I should have asked you when I mentioned the neighbours, but you mentioned adjoining forestry. You're explaining how some areas of the forest that you weren't expecting maybe took some wind damage, and how exposed areas, the stuff can blow down. Have you any idea how the forest next door is being managed? And have you any concerns that, let's say for sake of argument, a sudden clear fell there along your boundary could open up a different side of your forest to wind that it hasn't experienced yet?
That is a huge concern, and that is something that's out of your control, but is a huge... I mean, if the forest next door to me was clear felled, it would really compromise my forest, just the risk for wind. But I am actually... that forest is about 60% sycamore, with some Norway and other species. So I don't know why you'd be clear felling sycamore at this stage anyway. So until my forest gets its own internal stability, through mixed species, I'm hoping that it is actually up for sale at the minute. And I know, it's 155 acres. So I anyone I know kind of who is into CCF and kind of is into acquiring bigger forests, I'm like, did you know about this forest? Because I would love it. It'd be amazing if that was a CCF forest beside us as well. And we'd have this big block of CCF forestry in the Midlands, but we have to wait and see. But just the species composition, I mean, if it was all conifer, then I would be very concerned. But because there's, it's majority of it is broadleaves, I'm kind of a little bit more reassured that it will be there for a long time. Yeah.
No, very good. Now we'll talk about with the thinning in August just finished. You're officially involved in the CCF program, is that right? That's funded through the government?
Yeah, so I got involved so it's called the WIS, the Woodland Improvement Scheme, and the CCF portion. So the first iteration of that was just the Woodland Improvement Scheme. So the broadleaves went into that in 2019, I think it was, but we didn't actually draw down any payments out of that. So it's a little complicated. And then we put the whole forest in under the WIS CCF scheme when it was launched in 2020 in 2 blocks, because you could only do 10 hectares at a time. So we put 1 block. So anyway, so basically the whole forest is now under that scheme. So that scheme, it's amazing really. So tree marking, underplanting, pruning, if I need to get some fences repaired, potentially do a little bit of infrastructure. There's a whole suite. There's a long, long list of things that can be like tree guards if you need, of things that this can pay for. So at the moment now, if you were to go into it, it's €1,200 per hectare in 3 payments over 12 years. And that is for work done. But they also have included now an ecosystem service payment to owners of €150 per hectare per year for 7 years. So it's like a little sweetener in the pot because of the ecosystem services that these forests are deliver. It's something for the owner in that. But it means that all the work that's going on, the marking, everything that we're doing, it comes at no cost to me. And it means that all the timber, the value of the timber that's been harvested comes straight to me as an owner. So for me, for anyone, I mean, if you broadleaves, it's a no-brainer. And even if, definitely if you were thinking of going down the CCF route, absolutely. It's a great scheme. So yeah, I would have nothing but good things to say about that scheme. It's a really good initiative actually from the government.
Have you a crystal ball now, Olive, and tell us what you're planning to use that government funding to actually do in the forest? You've explained some other things, but how can you see the forest developing? And I know that the plan will change. I think you mentioned you've done a little bit of underplanting in the Conifer area already. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So as I was saying, there was one area in particular where we had 6 rows between the drain, between the shores that were put in, and we abandoned some racks. So we thinned 1 in 6 in there and then abandoned some of those racks, and we underplanted those racks with Western red cedar, and it's flying. It's doing so well, and it's a gorgeous tree. It's quite shade tolerant, so it's happy. Now, of course, all trees need some light, but it's happy enough in under, the high Norway spruce. It's tipping along real nicely, and then we kind of just randomly planted around. Now, you usually wouldn't underplant at a first thinning, because there just really isn't enough light. It's kind of, not the best use of it. It's kind of after the second thinning. But just in my situation, it's the way we, ended up managing, but also what I really wanted. I was pushing, I was like, I want to bring in new species now. I understand the risks. I understand they mightn't thrive. But as it turned out, it was a good decision for our site.
Had you much maintenance to do there, or was it a nice, clean, still shaded rack that left that it was pretty easy to get them up and running?
Zero maintenance on the Western red cedar. Again, I think because you're in under the conifer, there was no briars there. The vegetation is, the racks are greening over, but it's not massively competing, and they've really been able to get ahead. Now they went in as plugs as well. I mean, it's the Western red cedar is always in a plug. So I think that might have just helped them get going. Now you can see in other areas where they were planted and they didn't get enough light, and they're still sitting as really small, but they're still green. So I'm hoping after This thinning, when they get a bit more light, they'll shoot off. So we might do another bit of underplanting. So what we've used the scheme for is the marking on this second thinning. So that was a big part. So that's where it was actually Sean Hoskins, who works with Manus Crowley, came in, and I actually marked with him as well. You know, I've done some courses on tree marking, and to actually just have the opportunity to do it in your own forest with a forester was too good to pass up. So the two of us did it together. It was just the best learning experience for me. And that's where you walk around every square inch of the forest and you mark the trees for removal. So you identify your quality trees, the trees with, you know, straight bark, light branching, healthy crown. They don't need to be the biggest trees. It's literally looking at form. So what is going to be your future timber trees, your timber production? And then you mark what trees you want to take out around that to release that tree. So that's what we did. It took 5 days, the two of us. A lot of the grant went on that. We're going to do some high pruning on both the conifers and the broadleaves. So Dad had done a lot of pruning when the trees were small. So it's going around kind of those quality trees, the ones with straight root, is taking off kind of some of the higher branches to get that really nice, long, clean stem of timber. And we'll do that in the conifers as well, but only on the quality trees. Like there's no point pruning a tree that's going to go for pallet or something. It's only for your what will be saw log. So I mean that's quite a big job doing that. Road maintenance, maybe that we're looking at maybe some of the fencing needs a bit of repair. So little things like that. So that's kind of, and then of course the next thinning, the marking again, that's kind of the biggest kind of cost is getting the marking done before the next thinning as well.
Can I ask you, Olive, who was the contractor that came in to work? Did they understand the system that you're trying to work in? Because sometimes the contractors are very used to the thin to clear fell model, but maybe aren't as familiar with the thin to CCF model.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I was very lucky. So Manus works a lot with Liam Byrne. So Liam is actually a Pro Silva. He's the previous chair of Pro Silva Ireland. So Pro Silva, just quickly to explain, is an organisation that promotes and educates on continuous cover forestry. And I now actually work with them. So it's a small little family. Like I came to Manus completely separately, and the Manus was like, oh, we're looking to bring in someone to help with some of the administration. And that's kind of how I got involved. So Liam specialises in contracting on CCF sites. I mean, of course, he works on all sites, and completely understands what we're trying to achieve. So before even our first thinning, Liam, Manus and myself walked the entire forest, and I suppose they learned what I wanted to get out of it. I understood kind of what the limitations are, what are the risk areas, and it's this collaboration, and I see it very much as a collaboration between the three parties, the contractor, the forester and myself. They're part of this forest as much as I am as well. They've such an important role, and I can see they really care about the forest, which is really special as well. So we've built up that relationship, and so Liam does all the work, and his team do all the work there, and they completely understand. So I'm very lucky in that, but I suppose they can see my passion for CCF, and it's kind of, we're all working together on this project.
There's another question I want to ask you on the forest, and then we'll kind of wind up and you can explain anything else that's going on. But have you seen much natural regeneration happening now in the conifer area, especially because we understand that there's lots happening in the refor of the ash. What's happening under the conifer? Is there anything coming up?
Yeah. So this is kind of the biggest surprise. So we've got these veteran beech trees, as I mentioned, and they're throwing out a lot of seed. And under the sycamore in particular, the beech is thriving. And actually, I had the forestry inspector in one day, and he was like, oh, so you underplanted here? I'm like, no, that's all regen. And like, it's up to my shoulder. So we've got this lovely kind of understory of beech coming along there. And since we thinned, I'm finding oak saplings everywhere. And there's no oak tree.
Yeah.
There's no oak tree in the forest. There's none in the hedgerows in the fields around. I've asked the farmer, the neighbours, like, do you have any oak trees? And he's like, no. So I think it's about 1 kilometre, the nearest oak tree. Now we have jays nesting. We've got 2 nests or areas that I'm sure the jays are nesting in, and red squirrel. And I mean, crows will also bring in acorns. So I've got a whole team of little foresters planting acorns, planting oak. I mean, a lot of these trees that are coming now, they're not going to develop into, pole trees because we still don't have the light levels right, but it's telling me the potential of the site, that when we, in another couple of thinnings, we'll start getting oak coming naturally. And then we also seen a lot more birch. So there is birch kind of in the site anyway, and it's coming on. Seeing a lot of hawthorn, holly, and sycamore is coming as well. And so a lot of the time you were asking about where the ash was cleared. There is a lot of sycamore coming. So I just have to keep just snapping the sycamore back until the species I want get ahead of it, and kind of crowd it out. That's the only way, you just have to keep managing that. I do love sycamore, but it can take over. So it's just a case of, and that's easy to manage just by snapping back. So yeah, I mean, there's huge potential. That's the way I look at it, is there's huge potential in this site. And if we can just keep it standing in the next period of time, this is kind of a high risk time because the trees are getting tall. We're working on increasing stability. There's a lot of willow as well there. So, that's good for stability. And so, we're going gently. We'll see how it is. And, we just have to wait and see what nature does, respond to that.
Lovely. Well, is there anything else about the forest that I should have asked you and I didn't ask you? You did mention, for instance, the fire log business.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's a bit of a mad idea I had. Yeah. So I started thinning, then I'm like, what am I going to do with the thinnings? And again, I think it was just kind of encouragement. There's a few kind of people in the forest owner group who were doing firewood, some for themselves, some for sale. And I had a bit of money when I came back from the UK. So I says, right, I'm going to buy a processor. And I started at that and I set up a little business, and I mean, it kept me going. I wouldn't say I made much money out of it, but I did really, really enjoy it. People really liked the firewood that I had. I was a mixture of ash and sycamore, which is actually a really nice combination because the sycamore burns bright and hot quite fast, and then the ash kind of gives you that longevity in the fire. So it was actually a nice mix in the fireplace. And it was actually great because it was during COVID, so I could still go out and do deliveries because it was an essential service. And, people would be waiting for you to come, and you'd stand and you'd chat for half an hour. So, because there was a lot of elderly people I was delivering to. So that was really an amazing time, actually. And it was great that I had the business. But then about 2 years ago, kind of demand was growing, and I didn't have really a huge amount of equipment for lifting the logs into the processor. I was doing that myself, which is not necessarily a great idea. Yeah, and then I just was working out. I would have to invest quite a significant amount of money to get the equipment I needed to kind of build the business. And then I got the job with Pro Silva Ireland, and I was also working with Irish forest owners as well. So I made the decision to stop doing the firewood and kind of go more into the education space and administration, which is more kind of the skills, that I came from. I worked in editing before, so on science communication. So it kind of using those skills. So that was the firewood business, yeah.
So Olive, have you any advice for aspiring forest owners? I
think the main piece of advice that I would give anyone who has forestry or is interested in getting into forestry is to spend time in your forest. Well, this particularly if you have the forest. I think that's the most important first step. You need to know your forest. You need to know what you have in there. And the more time you spend in the forest, the more I think you'll realise the multiple benefits that it has. It's a fantastic place just for your own head to spend time in. But even when it comes to selling your timber, managing your forest, if you've spent time in it, you know where the value, you know what you have, you know, potential pitfalls, areas of your forest that, you know, maybe you want to exclude machinery from, all that kind of stuff. So I think a big thing that has happened in Ireland is that forest owners haven't engaged hugely with their forest. It was kind of something that you planted it down the back of the farm and you never really went into it. But it really is part of your farming enterprise, or, you know, the more time you spend in it, the more you get out of it, both financially and personally. So that would be the one bit of advice I would give.
Perfect, Olive. And then finally, the last question I have for you is maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Mná na Coille initiative that you're involved in.
Yes, thanks, Dermot. So the Mná na Coille is kind of a group that myself and Marina Conway, who is a forester, one of the few female foresters in Ireland, have kind of initiated in the last kind of couple of months. So we got to know each other through attending meetings. Often we would be the only two women in the room, and we became friends. And, you know, through conversations, you know, we both feel passionate about empowering women and engaging more women in forestry. We said we would see if we could kind of do something about it. And the Forestry Promotion Fund opened this year, and we said we'd put in a proposal, and which we were successful with. So the project it's still in the early days. We did a survey, and we were hoping for maybe 100 respondents. We had 251, I think it is, we're at now, which was huge. You could see the amount of time people spent in submitting their answers on it. They were so open, honest, passionate, and really there's so many women out there who want to get involved and kind of be more engaged, be more visible, and I suppose help support other women. You know, a big thing is how do we get young girls and young adults, both male and female, into forestry as an industry. And then, you know, how do we raise the profile of women and ensure women are included in every discussion about forestry and all policy. So they're kind of the two themes we're kind of running with at the moment. We're going to have a couple of in-person events. And that's really just to bring women together and to see where it can go, because, you know, as much as Marina and I are passionate about it, it's not our, you know, it has to be about all women. And so we want to see if we can get kind of a core group together that can bring this forward. So that's where we're at with that. But yeah, no, it's been really positive, and it's been great to just see how many women are out there working in forestry and are passionate about trees and forests and wanting to get involved. So that's amazing.
No, brilliant. Okay, and it ties in with something I'm hearing as well about succession, because we have a lot of farm owners and they don't have a son who's interested. There's a daughter, and it's just a little bit more challenging perhaps for girls and ladies to get involved. So this probably ties in.
Yeah, and I think it's all just about visibility. There are a huge number of female forest owners out there, and it's just about, I suppose, that visibility and showing that it is possible. You know, I think forestry is a great, you know, I think for every succession planning on every farm, I think forestry should be discussed. It may not work for everybody, of course, but I think it should always be included in that conversation. I think it's really important that we do, because, I mean, for me, the reason I'm at home in rural Ireland working the land is because of the forestry. I have no interest in kind of more traditional agriculture. You know, I don't want that tie of having to look after animals, having to get loans from the banks. That lifestyle is not for me. Whereas forestry gives me that way of staying connected, being in rural Ireland, you know, producing a crop from the land, a product from the land that is essential, you know, to human existence. You know, we need timber while also caring for biodiversity. So, you know, forestry can, depending on what way your succession is looking, can be a great addition into the farm that will keep the family involved who may not, if, you know, in traditional agriculture. So I think it all ties in, you know, and look, anything to promote forestry and to kind of show people the potential that forestry has in Ireland, and how multifunctional and diverse it can be. I'm interested in all of that.
Okay. Well, listen, Olive, thanks very much for doing the interview with me. It's much appreciated.
You're very welcome. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That's it for this podcast. Feel free to comment or subscribe for more episodes.